black man voting for Trump?
Because I'm not led by the nose. I think for myself.
You think for yourself?
The white man doesn't think for me. The black man doesn't think for me. I don't need Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, and the rest of those clowns.
So Trump ain't a clown?
No, Trump is not a clown.
He's a straight house.
I think it's condescending to assume that because I'm a black man, I'm supposed to vote for a Democrat. Whether it's coming from the media telling me to do it, or from a politician telling me to do it, or even from another black person to tell me to do it. You can't, on one hand, say that you're against slavery, but then on the other hand, tell me how to vote, what to wear, how to speak, you know what I mean, how to live my life, because black people are supposed to do these things. They're supposed to vote this way. They're supposed to talk this way. They're supposed to walk this way. They're supposed to believe a certain thing, because that's slavery. You can't say that you're against slavery, but then put me in a box and tell me that this is how I have to perform.
You called me. You
I didn't
called
call
me.
you no.
No,
I didn't.
You did.
No, I didn't.
But you can say that. That's just constitutional right. You know anything about the Constitution?
How call you?
Oh, okay. That's a big difference.
You're Uncle Tom.
Oh, is that my Uncle Tom?
Yeah.
To call somebody an Uncle Tom is completely idiotic. Because if you've read Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, you'll see that Uncle Tom was actually a very good person. He did a lot of good things. He sacrificed on behalf of other slaves who were on the plantation.
After educating myself on the story of Uncle Tom and learning about Josiah Henson, he was a completely good person, completely opposite of what the black community thinks Uncle Tom is.
Uncle Tom was the hero. He was the hero.
He was self-sacrificing. And ultimately, he paid the ultimate sacrifice for not ratting out the other slaves that had escaped.
Uncle Tom was the hero of Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and nobody knows that, so they call us Uncle Toms to hurt us. And every time I get called, I just go, oof, you should read the book.
A lot of black conservatives have kind of flipped the narrative on Uncle Tom. I mean, we embrace it. You know, we say, yeah, that's me.
I'll get into debates with people. They'll call me an Uncle Tom, and I'll say, thank you, I appreciate the compliment.
It should be a badge of honor. I wear it as a badge of honor. I like to tell people I'm a proud Uncle Tom.
This whole scenario is indicative of the problem with the black community. The man who's trying to save the black community is demonized, and the one who's damaging and destroying the black community, a lot of people don't even know him. They don't even know the demon in their own communities. But the one who's helping them, they want to throw you away.
What they're actually meaning to call someone is a Sambo, which Sambo was the one who was always telling on the other slaves and telling the master where the slaves were hiding. He wanted to see the slaves get caught and the master triumph.
Sambo was who they refer to as Uncle Tom, and then they just switch it to Sambo. They don't stop and think to say, oh man, all these years I've been saying, wow, I have been kind of brainwashed to a bit to see it this way. And they don't see that. They just completely move Uncle Tom aside and bring in Sambo, and now you're Sambo.
I can change a bigot faster than I can a patronizing liberal.
I'm going to now lead us in an apology from white Americans to African Americans on behalf of our country, to you and to your ancestors and to all of your people. So to the African Americans in the room who would wish and be willing to participate in this, please stand up.
I saw a clip of Marianne Williamson where she had a bunch of white people.
And now I'd like to ask white Americans who are sitting near you.
Stand around black people in this church and repeat this solemn chant of, I'm sorry, basically, for all the atrocities that my people committed against you.
On behalf of myself and on behalf of my country. To you and all African Americans.
I don't understand the fetishization of victimhood that white progressives want to put on to the African American community. It's like, how dare you?
For all the oppression and all of the injustices. I apologize.
Dietrich Bonhoeffer said it best. He said that one of the most difficult human phenomena to confront is not malice, because malice you can confront with violence. It's folly. It's when someone is doing something that they believe to be in your interest. And the more you say to them, you're strangling me to death. Oh, but I love you.
At their core, a white liberal is the ultimate narcissist. That's it. The ultimate narcissist. It's the people that adopt animals for the purpose of saying I adopted an animal. Like, to them, we are these pathetic, cute little playthings that they can then take to their friends and say, look at this person that I helped.
As we call it, xenophilic tokenism. They take on the struggles of others so that they deflect away from talking about actual issues.
They want so much to be a good white person and to be perceived as a good white person. And if you want to see if a white progressive is a good white person, put them in the room with a black conservative. See how that conversation goes.
When someone says that they're progressive, they shouldn't automatically be perceived as caring, non-racist, non-bigoted.
Most of my experiences of racialized dialogue in a negative way or in confrontations with white progressives who I guess hate me because they hate racism.
Just yesterday, I got a message from a white lady saying that I was a disgrace to my race. It was odd to me that a white woman would declare me a disgrace to my race based on her own stereotypes and preconceived notions of what minorities should think.
They sell this idea of tolerance and inclusivity, and we love everyone and everyone is welcomed here, but no, that's not true. We're only welcome there if we believe exactly what you want us to believe.
They will act as if for you to rebuff their overtures of sadness or apology is in itself the most despicable crime. It is because the modern white liberal needs you to be a victim. They have weaponized the notion of being a victim. And various minorities have latched onto that. And that has become the identity that they've taken on.
What message is this sending to these white people that are having to go out in their actual lives or their workplaces or whatever and like deal with black people? The message that is sending to them is that you have to walk on eggshells with this person. This person's going to be a perpetual victim, and I'm going to be so afraid to interact with this person as if they're a human being that I'm just not going to interact at all. And I think that that is the real result of all of the woke, splaining, anti-racist, intersectionality crap.
There is a class of colored people who make a business of keeping the troubles, the wrongs, and the hardships of the Negro race before the public. Some of these people do not want the Negro to lose his grievances because they do not want to lose their jobs.
They were fighting for us to have the right to our opinion, not the right to vote for whoever the white liberals said black people are supposed to vote for.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
It don't have nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with the fact I want something for my community. I would love to see.
Take a look at my record, man. I extended the voting rights 25 years. I have a record that is second to none. The NAACP has endorsed me every time I've run.
I was a radical in terms of the civil rights movement. I was I was not a supporter of Martin Luther King, but more a supporter of Malcolm X. The welfare state has done to black Americans what slavery could not have done, Jim Crow and the harshest racism could not have done, namely to destroy the black family.
And people have not pointed out to you the challenge of freedom. And what do people do with freedom when they don't know how to handle it? They reinvent their oppression, even as it has faded away.
Oh, I think we're in the second or third generation where men have been pushed out of families, and the kids are responding to that, and the responses are quite negative. There are some very specific programs, in retrospect, that were developed that were in line to destroy with black families.
My fellow Americans, ours has never been a narrative of grievance and entitlement. We have never believed that I am doing poorly because you are doing well. We have never been jealous of one another and never envious of each other's successes.
The lifting up of the woman does not require the tearing down of the man.
What is it about the ideology of the Republican Party that attracted you to it?
The basic theoretical notion of personal responsibility. If you stay the correct course, then you will reap the benefits of that. And I believe that, the platform of the Republican Party gives individuals that mind.
Who is killing these black victims? Not whites, not the police, but other blacks.
3 of my nephews got shot in the head. My cousin, he got shot up in the chest part. So overall, there were 6 family members murdered. None of the cases have been solved yet.
Blacks are convinced that the #1 issue facing the country right now is social justice, racist white cops, discrimination, systemic racism, microaggression, whatever new word they come up with, and it's a bunch of nonsense.
And we know that you're not concerned about justice, because if you was concerned about justice, you would be concerned about justice in all those other black-on-black cases that exist in Black America. So we can't say that y'all really down for justice.
What's the mechanism? Why does the welfare state dissolve the family structure?
For one thing, it makes it unnecessary for fathers to support their offspring. And in fact, it makes it counterproductive in many cases.
It starts in the home. If the father's not in the home, the boy will find the father in the streets. Yeah.
7 out of every 10 black babies born in the United States are born out of wedlock. And yet, in Africa, where the experience of slavery was not endured, you have the strongest commitment to the complementarity of man and woman in marriage.
You can't just be talking about slavery every day. It ended in 1865. This is 2020. We got to press forward rather than looking in the past and saying, oh, well, woe was me because of slavery.
Right.
The #1 problem domestically facing this country is a breakdown of the family. And President Obama said it. I didn't.
There's no more important ingredient for success. Nothing that would be more important for us reducing violence than strong, stable families. Which means we should do more to promote marriage and encourage fatherhood.
Everyone around me tried to pick my candidate for me. And then told me every time I said I like Trump that I couldn't say it out loud, or my career would be over. I get kicked out the black community because we're supposed to have a monolithic thought. We can only be Democrats.
I didn't call you. Oh, okay, that's a big difference. You're Uncle Tom.
And Uncle Tom. Uncle Tom.
Bedwench.
Bootlicker.
Black white supremacist.
Chucking and jiving.
House Negro.
Coon.
Uncle Tom.
Coon.
Now, it's a joke. Everything's racist. Just because somebody thinks differently than you does not make them a racist, okay? And when you continually keep calling people racist, what you're actually doing is diminishing the experiences that real people that lived through eras like that actually had.
Ease is a greater threat to progress than hardship.
Do you think that race plays a part in wealth distribution, or either a mindset that you can't or
Today?
cannot? Yeah.
No.
You don't?
No, I don't. I don't. Hey, you and I, we're proof. Why would race have anything to do with it?
When I got out of bed the morning of May 31st, 2020, after a sleepless night, I knew I had to do something. I didn't know what or what I would say. I saw the protests and the riots. I'd heard all the accusations about racism, racial injustice, and police brutality. I was horrified by what happened to Mr. George Floyd, but I was also horrified about what was happening to my adopted country, my beloved America. And I just couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't keep it inside. So I went to one of these protests and I did the most American thing I could think of. I told the protesters exactly what I thought. I admit it. I wasn't very diplomatic. Maybe that's why my remarks went viral. You can find them easily on YouTube. Many people admired me for what I said. Many hated me. I don't care either way. I didn't do this for me. I did it for America, the greatest country in the world. And I know what I'm talking about. I was born in Cameroon, a country in West Africa. My family lived day to day, simply trying to survive. When I hear people talk about corruption and civil rights abuses here in the US, I shake my head. They never lived in Cameroon, or anywhere within 1,000 miles of Cameroon. That's for sure. I came to the United States for what I could never have in my native land. Freedom and happiness, the opportunity to get a good education, to earn a good living, to build a good life for myself. And that's exactly what I've done. That's what America has allowed me to do. And for that, I am eternally grateful. Since coming to the United States, I have trained in nursing and worked as a visiting nurse assistant. Recently, I received my master's in healthcare administration, and I am now working as a healthcare executive. My career ambition is to close the gap in healthcare outcomes and design new and better strategies to ensure that underserved populations get the healthcare services they need. I also serve as a reservist in the United States Air Force. And yes, I look forward to getting married and starting a family. My life is grounded in a simple truth. There is no better place to live for anyone of any race than America. And everybody outside of America knows it. That's why they line up, like I did, at U.S. embassies around the world, hoping for a chance to come here to live and work. This is truly the line of opportunity. So, don't go around trashing it. I don't care where you come from, or what your complaint is, or what your skin color is. I'm not having it. And that brings me back to May 31st, at that park in Washington, D.C. Mr. Floyd should not have died as he did. But make no mistakes, Black Lives Matter and their allies are using George Floyd's death to split Americans apart at the very moment we should be coming together. They're striking at the heart of this country, twisting the knife of white guilt with one hand and black resentment with the other. These protests are not about empowering black people. They are about disempowering black people. Because when the fire stops burning, all that remains is hopelessness, anger, and shame. That's not empowerment. That's oppression. Look at the innocent victims, the business owners, many of them black, who've lost their lives' work to looting and arson. What are they supposed to do now? Who cleans up the graffiti and the shattered glass? Who rebuilds? Who, after seeing the dreams go up in smoke, even wants to? Every week in Chicago, New York, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., black criminals kill black men, women, and children. Children! Do you know the name of a single one of them? Why don't their lives matter? Where are the protests for them? Why do we only get angry when a white police officer kills a black man, while dozens of our brothers and sisters are mowed down every weekend in our neighborhoods? Black Lives Matter and its supporters, with their bottomless obsession with racism, pretend to be leading us to a better future. But in fact, they're setting us into a spiral of self-destruction. It was an intense struggle for me to get to America. I love it too much to stand aside and watch it be torn apart. Stand with me. I'm not oppressed. I'm not a victim. I am a free American. I'm Nestra Yumga.
So this government has failed us. The government itself has failed us. And the white liberals who have been posing as our friends have failed us. And once we see that all these other sources to which we've turned have failed, we stop turning to them and turn to ourselves. We need a self-help program, a do-it-yourself philosophy, a do-it-right-now philosophy. It's already too late philosophy. This is what you and I need to get with. And the only way we're going to solve our problem is with a self-help program. Before we can get a self-help program started, we have to have a self-help philosophy.
Any minority that has a block of votes that stick together is in a strategic position. Either way you go, that's who gets it. You're in a position to determine who'll go to the White House and who'll stay in the doghouse. You're the one who has that power. You can keep Johnson in Washington, D.C., or you can send him back to his Texas cotton patch. You're the one who sent Kennedy to Washington. You're the one who put the present Democratic administration in Washington, D.C. The whites were evenly divided. It was the fact that you threw 80% of your votes behind the Democrats that put the Democrats in the White House. When you see this, you can see that the Negro vote is the key factor. And despite the fact that you are in a position to be the determining factor, what do you get out of it? The Democrats have been in Washington, D.C. only because of the Negro vote. They've been down there 4 years. And all other legislation they wanted to bring up, they brought it up and gotten it out of the way, and now they bring up you. And now they bring up you. You put them first and they put you last. Because you're a chump. In Washington, D.C., in the House of Representatives, there are 257 who are Democrats. Only 177 are Republican. In the Senate, there are 67 Democrats. Only 33 are Republicans. The party that you bash controls 2/3 of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and still they can't keep their promise to you.
I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be.
People need to start taking to the streets. This is a dictator.
You know, there needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
Enemies of the state.
Show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
Do something about your dad's immigration practices, you feckless.
When they go low, we kick.
How do you resist the temptation to run up and wring her neck?
The biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them radicalized up to the right.
I thought he should have punched him in the face. I said, even if you lost, he insulted your wife.
Yes.
He came down the escalator and called Mexicans rapists and murderers. He said, well, what do you think I should have done? I said, I think you should have punched him in the face and then gotten out of the race. You would have been a hero.
I'd like to punch him in the face. I said if we were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him. Punch some people in the face!
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president?
They're still going to have to go out and put a bullet in Donald Trump, and that's a fact.
Look, as his character is stabbed to death.
Where is John Wilkes Booth when you need him?
I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
A Missouri state senator is under investigation by the Secret Service after saying she hopes President Trump is assassinated.
I will go and take Trump out tonight.
And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
And sadly, the domestic enemies to our voting system and our honoring our Constitution are right at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. And that should be, everyone should take note of that on both levels, that this isn't, they're not going to let up, and they should not.
If you think we're rallying now, you ain't seen nothing yet.
They're stoking fears about black and brown Americans, lying about how minorities will destroy the suburbs, whipping up violence and intimidation, and they're pinning it all on what's been an overwhelmingly peaceful movement for racial solidarity. It's true. Research backs it up. Only a tiny fraction of demonstrations have had any violence at all. So what the president is doing is once again patently false. It's morally wrong. And yes, it is racist. But that doesn't mean it won't work. Because this is a difficult time, a confusing time. And when people hear these lies and crazy conspiracies repeated over and over and over again, they don't know what to think. With everything going on in their lives, they don't have time to fact-check falsehoods being spread throughout the internet. And even reasonable people might get scared. And the one thing this president is really, really good at is using fear and confusion and spreading lies to win.
Are the ideas of white fragility and white privilege useful in understanding and addressing racism? And why or why not? So, Coleman, do you want to start that off?
Sure. I don't think I'm not sure I could be friends with someone who actually took white fragility as a recipe for how to live. Luckily, I don't know anyone like that, but what she says in the book is essentially for if say you and I are having a conversation, you're white, I'm black. There are totally normal human conversational moves and feelings that you're not supposed to avail yourself of, or else you fall into the sin of committing white fragility. You can't remain silent. You can't argue back. This is if we're talking about race. You can't express your opinion. You can't express your disagreement, no matter how understanding. The mere fact that I'm black and you're white means you have to accept what I'm saying. You have to admit that you're racist as a starting point. And anything less than that admission is just, on this view, by definition, denialism. So it's a very again, like I have intimate friendships with white people, and I don't think any of them could operate under such a rubric. It's a very strange way to show you respect me as a black person, to say, you'll never disagree with anything I say. In fact, what you're treating me like implicitly is like, I don't know, a petulant child who can't be pushed back against because my feelings, because I'm so unreachable by reason that you have to be the adult in the room, and I have to be the child. So that I don't see how that points a path forward at all.
I suppose you could say that there's some value in asking people to put themselves in the other person's shoes. So if you're an organization that's mostly white and there are relatively few people of color in it, it's not unreasonable to ask, if you're a white person in that organization, that you imagine yourself to be this other guy. Imagine yourself to be the odd person out, the only woman on the team, or the only black in the department, or something like that. How do you think it feels? How do you think it feels if people look at you and they impute to you certain views or expectations or whatever, just based upon the fact of the way you look? How do you think it feels to be, in that position? And if that's what people have in mind when they talk about privilege, be aware of the fact that whiteness actually matters in certain circumstances, and that people who are not white in those circumstances may have to bear certain burdens or meet certain challenges. I mean, I can go that far. Of course, you could also ask the person to imagine what it's like to be the white person in that circumstance. For example, to imagine being a cop confronted with a recalcitrant citizen who might be dangerous and armed, and you're white, and you have to deal with that situation, and you might be afraid, and you might do whatever you do. I could ask a person to imagine and put themselves in that. So in that situation, so in a way, that's just a kind of human empathy, and you can ask it of people depending on the circumstance, whether they be white or non-white. And so far, I'm willing to go. But I think there's something really important in what Coleman just said, which is that often this emphasis on, white silence equals violence. This idea of check your privilege presumes a certain kind of black fragility. It's kind of predicated upon the idea that black people have to be treated with kid gloves in all situations. Otherwise, offense is given to them, discomfort is imposed upon them. They are made not to feel welcome. What's the new term of art? Inclusion and belonging. Inclusion and belonging. We have to make sure that people feel that they belong. And this infantilization of black people on the supposition that the least off word said, the smallest gesture might be, somehow threatening to their very sense of well-being, is, I think, what's at the root of a lot of this emphasis on white privilege and so on.
Linguist and award-winning author John McWhorter. His latest book, Woke Racism, How a New Religion Has Betrayed Black America. It argues that today's anti-racism is hurting Black communities and weakening American society. John, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on. Now, you've said that you see wokeness as akin to a religious doctrine, and you call its followers the elect. Explain what you mean.
Well, what I mean is not that it's wrong to be awakened to oppressive realities, which is what woke meant about 10 minutes ago. But I mean, there's a certain kind of woke person who feels that it's their job to get people fired and to make people cry and to call people names and to call people white supremacists if they disagree with a very narrow, punitive way of looking at how race works. And I think that what's really going on is that all of us are so scared of being called a racist on social media that we pretend to agree with these people. And if this goes on much longer, these people's way of looking at things is going to be the way everything works. And I don't think that's what any of us want, except that sliver of what I call the elect. They think they're anointed.
And you write that America is now obsessed with discussing and acknowledging racism. But do you think that for too long we didn't talk about racism enough and that this country hadn't fully come to terms with our dark history, perhaps even still has not?
You know, honestly, with all due respect, I don't know what that means. I would understand what that meant if it was 1960. But I'm not sure what we mean by coming to terms. I think that, you know, long before June 2020, this is a country that talked about race and racism all the time. This is a country that had affirmative action and scholarships and Black people penetrating the national fabric ever more every few years. I think there are many great things to say. There is a roughly third of the Black community who really need real help. And I don't mean just help themselves. I mean, we need intelligent programs to help people to have better lives. But the idea that we hadn't paid enough attention until roughly June of 2020, with all due respect, I think that's something we're taught to say.
And so you feel that we've had enough in history books, for example, that we've had enough acknowledgments just as far as the past struggles were concerned?
Yes. And I know that seems like I'm trying to be contrarian, but I think that we got past that. Now, if you asked in 1985 what the history books were like, well, then, yeah, I think there needed to be some work done. But in 2020, the idea that history books were mostly in denial about slavery and racism, I just don't see it.
Well, you know, I think the playing devil's advocate here, I've heard a lot of conversations about the legacy of slavery, right? When it comes to medical attention, when it comes to education, when it comes to pretty much, you name it, access to entrepreneurship in this country. And so I think that in some segments, that is the concern of what has not been addressed or what has not been dealt with is those legacies that continue to plague the Black community. Would you disagree with that?
No, there are those legacies and they do need to be battled, but this is the problem. If there are fewer Black people than white people in a certain profession, the question is it racism that created it in any sense that any of us know racism to be and that can be fought now? So yeah, there do need to be more Black doctors, without a doubt. But is the reason that there aren't Black doctors a racism that we can fight, as opposed to something that went on in the past, where fixing it now is going to be something other than battling racism?
I'm very curious, your take on critical race theory, such a flashpoint right now. Why do you think that it can be problematic to teach children about the role of race and racism in our society?
It is not problematic to teach kids about the role of racism in society. I have no problem with that. I have a problem with where it goes overboard, where a certain kind of teacher decides that they need to teach white kids that they are potential oppressors and Black kids that they need to beware being oppressed by whites, and taking white kids and Black kids and putting them in different parts of the class and having the whole curriculum be centered on the idea that racism needs to be battled. That's the problem. That's what a lot of parents are worried about. Now, there are some people who would like racism and slavery not to be taught in school. However, I don't think that's the majority of people who are involved in this debate. What somebody like me is worried about is when school becomes all about overturning power differentials, because even though you'd like to overturn them, that's one of about 100 things that school might be about. There are a lot of people saying that that should be the main thing kids are taught, because I think that kids should be taught early on to be good little leftist radicals. And I don't mean radical as a slur. But still, I don't think that school should be teaching politics.
And do you feel that racism is systemic in this country?
I don't know what that question means. There are disparities between white people and black people that are conditioned often by definite racism in the past, and sometimes subtle racism now. But the answer to those questions, how you get past those things, is not always to look for something in the system that is biased against black people and eliminate it. I wish it were that easy, but it isn't. And that's why these things are hard. We're being taught that all of it is very simple and that it's all about just teaching white people that they're bad. I'm not sure how that helps poor black people who need help with their real lives.
You certainly have a lot to say about today's cancel culture, that you feel that it's gone too far. Do you think that in the past few decades we've allowed too much? I don't know if I want to ask it this way, because I know that you don't necessarily, I don't know that you would classify it this way, but have we allowed too much overt racism?
You mean in the past few decades?
Yes.
Depends on what the episode is, but I think that over the past 2 years, it's become fashionable to chase people out of their jobs for something that nobody would have considered racism even 10 minutes ago. So no, I don't think that what's been going on since roughly June of 2020 is just giving white men their just desserts. That happens sometimes, but the reason somebody writes a book like mine is when you're watching people getting fired and yelled at and castigated left and right for things that really simply aren't wrong under any conception of these sorts of things, where somebody needs to blow the whistle and say, this is getting exaggerated, this is becoming Salem, and I think that it needs to stop, because there are people who need help while a lot of us stand by virtue signaling, and it really worries me.
John McWhorter, Woke Racism, How a New Religion Has Betrayed Black America. It is available now wherever books are sold. We thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Just because someone claims to be helping you doesn't mean they actually are. In 1956, a drug under the trade name of Contergan was introduced to market, promoted to pregnant women to cure their morning sickness, and it worked. But that drug, more commonly known as thalidomide, resulted in over 10,000 children being born with severe deformities. Starting in 1932, the United States Public Health Service offered free health care to hundreds of African American men. But in 1972, those men, who were still alive, found out that they were being studied as they fell ill and died while the government left their easily curable syphilis untreated. And about 3,000 years ago, the Greeks left a gift for the Trojans, a large wooden horse, but inside were soldiers who conquered the city of Troy. Today, there's a philosophy masquerading as anti-racism that claims to help black people, but it too is a Trojan horse that harms the very people it proposes to help. This philosophy is encapsulated in quasi-religious texts like Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility. Few books about race have more openly infantilized black people than this supposedly authoritative tome. It portrays black people as perpetual victims, always crying, always angry, needing whites to tiptoe around us. It's condescending. Those who practice the bigotry of low expectations, demanding testing and academic standards need to be lowered to accommodate black people, make it appear as if we're incapable of succeeding on the same level as everyone else. Those who claim moral virtue in doing the work are in fact doing the work of making me into a perfect idiot. By focusing on disparate outcomes and that which is problematic, this racist orthodoxy distracts us from doing the actual work that could help improve the lives of black Americans. Studies on mismatch show that those lowered academic standards cause black people to attend schools where they're less likely to earn degrees than they would otherwise be. When we look at statistics showing that black boys are more often suspended in schools, we hear preachers of the orthodoxy argue that the only reason this could be is racist bias, never mind how the effects of poverty might cause it. Mayor Bill de Blasio spearheaded an effort to make sure black boys are disciplined less. But the problem is, there are violence and gangs at predominantly black schools, and disciplining gang members less prevents all the other black students at those schools from learning. It's a very human thing to take on the victim identity. All people do it. A way to do that as a black person is to read a book like White Fragility and say, yes, I want to be treated that way. And it's unfortunate that black thinkers such as Ibram Kendi have adopted this way of thinking too. But this is not the mainstream black view. Yes, we can't has never been the slogan for Black America, and it's not now. There are real things we could do that I think would improve life for Black Americans. Things like ending the war on drugs, making sure that all women have long-lasting reproductive contraception available to them, making sure that all children are taught to read via phonics rather than the whole word method. That might sound wonky, but it's more important than it sounds. And supporting vocational training, getting rid of the idea that everyone has to go to college and pretend to enjoy Shakespeare. If we just did those four things, we'd be in a completely different world. But unfortunately, they don't provide white people with the moral absolution that white fragility's supposedly anti-racist practice does. America needs to understand that there's a difference between having a religion and practical political activism. Virtue signaling replacing truly asking, what can I do to help, is more Martin Luther than Martin Luther King. I'm John McWhorter. Join me in standing for a more productive and genuine anti-racism at fairforall.org.
Hey folks, Brett here. I want to talk to you about a thought that has been preoccupying me over the last several months. It is a concern about where intersectionality is going to lead us. But in order to understand the concern, I have to step back into evolutionary history. There are really two ways in which cooperation evolves. The first one is very ancient. It is based on genetic relatedness, and it's very hard to put a starting point in it, but it literally goes back billions of years. The other kind of cooperation is based on various kinds of reciprocity, and it is much newer and much more fragile. It really gets going in human beings after the invention of farming approximately 10,000 years ago. The problem stems from the fact that when reciprocity-based cooperation breaks down, we default to gene-based cooperation. Now look at that in the context of intersectionality, which has captured the attention of the far left. Intersectionality effectively argues that people have different kinds of oppression that they have historically suffered from based on the categories that they inhabit. So your race, your gender, your sex all carry degrees of oppression that come from history. And the intersectionalists would like to transfer well-being from those who have historically been privileged to those who have historically been oppressed based essentially on an accounting scheme. How many different kinds of oppression have you faced, and what are the implications of how those different kinds of oppression interact? But the problem is that this way of thinking, which is very frequently a cartoon of reality, it does not depict the way oppression actually functions in the present. It lacks nuance. But beyond that, in order to function, it has to define an enemy. The enemy is effectively a fiction. In this case, it is something called whiteness. And the way the enemy is drawn, whiteness is an inherent characteristic, something that can be read on the skin. And what that means is there's no escaping it. So for people who suffer from whiteness, you are simply going to be on the losing end of the intersectional juggernaut, no matter what you do. If you think about how that is likely to unfold, people who are the object of ire from the intersectionalists are going to be backed against the wall together. Who are they going to be? Well, primarily they're going to be straight and white and very frequently male. What happens, though, if you back straight white males against the wall together? Well, think about what goes on the intersectional side. As the intersectionalists take power, the coalition that they have assembled is likely to break down. In other words, those who are on the intersectional side but are not at the top of it have a lot to lose in the reordering of things that would come from a win by the intersectionalists. So cooperation, game theoretically, is very likely to break down amongst the intersectionalists. At the same time, the people who they have backed against the wall together have a second basis for cooperation, and it is much more durable. It is genetic cooperation. So the concern that I have is that the intersectionalists may end up creating the very enemy they claim they are fighting. They're going to back straight white males against the wall and speak of the devil. White nationalism will emerge from that cohort. And when it does, those people will feel empowered and they will feel self-righteous because they have been accused of things that are, frankly, a form of bigotry. They have been accused by bigots of oppressing others, and they have been told that they are not entitled to well-being, no matter how they individually have behaved. And so what do they have to lose by cooperating together against the intersectionalists and essentially creating the world that the intersectionalists claim already exists? Now, what we should do about this is not entirely clear, but one thing that must happen is we must level up our thinking, and we must understand that backing people against the wall who have a genetic basis for cooperation is very dangerous, because history tells us that movements created by such people can be very destructive, and that ultimately they may turn into a genocidal menace. So what is the outgrowth of all of this preoccupation that I've had on this topic? I think the answer is fairly clear. The answer is that we must recognize that the very best things that human beings are capable of are based on this more elevated type of cooperation. We have to resist the urge to fall into this negative kind of tribalism that is driven on both sides by the intersectional movement. And we must foster the kind of cooperation that has spread over the course of recent history, where people increasingly ignore genetic relatedness and they find other reasons to get along.